couple of things I find utterly infuriating and morally repugnant, and some of the underlying facts of which you might be absolutely staggered by, but I'll explain that in a little minute. Now, first of all, I'll be talking about drivers who crash into someone's car and then want to drive away, usually because they've got no insurance and no driving license, and why that affects everybody and not just the people they crash into. But also, as you may have heard, they now appear to want to experiment on children as young as 10 with puberty-blocking drugs, even though they are currently banned. So more about my thoughts on that in the second half of the video. But first of all, let's get to my example here of why I think this is such an infuriating situation where we have drivers crashing into somebody and then want to drive away. And in many cases, they have no insurance and no driving license. And also an unbelievable response from this driver when he's called out for crashing into this woman's car. Watch this.
This man has just crashed into this lady's car. Look, he's got his child. Look. And he's going to drive off from the scene. You're going to drive off now. You're going to drive, yeah? No worries. The police will be coming.
And just so that you can hear what he said, I've had to turn the volume up and really examine it. He said, "Why won't you let me move my car?"
Why? Because you're going to drive off from a crash. You pulled out from that road right there and you crashed into this lady's car. Sorry, can you just shut your door because he's going to try it. You crashed into this lady's car.
You shut up. I'm racist.
Yes, you are racist.
Because you crashed into a lady that's with her, mate. Come on.
If you didn't hear, he's calling this other chap here who's complaining about what's going on, he's calling him racist. Now, obviously, this has got absolutely nothing at all to do with race. He's been called out by this guy for crashing into this lady's car. He's obviously just seen it and he's filmed it. He shows in a minute that he's working literally a couple of doors up. He's seen what's happening and he saw that the guy was going to drive off. He stood in front of his car, prevented him from moving away. This is kind of the best contemporaneous footage you can ever get. Very often we don't get it. I'll explain difficulties with that in just a minute, but let's finish it.
The lady was coming down the road and you have pulled out from that turn in into her car. Yeah, look.
You are racist. You are idiot.
See, again, it's calling him racist. It's utterly infuriating. It's nothing to do with race. He's just obviously crashed into someone's car.
I'm never pulled out on someone. You are an idiot. Hold on, man. Did you just pull out and tell him that? No, I didn't pull the car. What the shoe? I was stood here. Still here.
The guy said he was stood there and he saw him pull out on this lady.
We're working right here. This is our truck. Yeah, we watched everything. So you definitely crashed into her.
So this is a contemporaneous record of this guy who's filming to say he was working in that house a couple of doors up. He saw this guy come out and crash into this lady. This is a common phenomenon where someone's pulling out, turning left into a road. They look left and right and they fail to look right again for some reason. And in fact, it happened to me. This very thing happened to me in, I think, 2003 or 4, thereabouts. Vehicle pulled out in exactly the same way, smashed into me. I went onto the other side of the road, almost flipped my car over, just about got back onto the correct side of the road when there's cars coming in the opposite direction, just about avoided a head-on smash. So this is a fairly common type of collision where someone pulls out without checking right. Again, for the avoidance of doubt, I wasn't the vehicle that pulled out and crashed into someone. They crashed into me. And it's matters like these that I get lots and lots of emails about. What do they do? What does the law say? What chance do they have? Whether it's speeding, parking, driving offences, a dispute with your neighbour, you've got a product that you need to return and you need to know what your rights are. I get countless hundreds and hundreds of these emails. And so for that reason, I'm developing BlackBeltBarrister Pro, which will be an all-in-one system of templates, guides, legislation, question and answer. It will be AI-driven with my guidance and training with countless case law, legislation, real experience, real templates, real court documents and judgments that will guide and inform artificial intelligence to assist you. If you want the early bird special for BlackBeltBarrister Pro, I'll put the link in the description below. It will be available very, very soon, and this price will not hang around long. So check it out below, and hopefully we'll answer all of your questions anytime they pop up. Also, guys, just a very quick reminder for you to stay safe and secure when you're browsing the internet, connecting to networks, and downloading files. For example, if you're in a coffee shop, you might connect to their Wi-Fi. It might prompt you that you need to log in with Google or something else. You might then put in your username and your password for Google, but you're not giving it to Google, you're giving it to this software in the middle, if indeed it's a malicious network. Also, if you're downloading a file, you might think it's just a PDF, but it might actually contain a malicious script, which might well be a session hijacker. A session is something that stores all of the information for your browser where you're logged into email and internet banking and these sort of things. And a session hijacker script, which is obviously malicious, will give a hacker complete access to all of the logins that you're currently using in your browser. You can help to avoid all of these and indeed to stay anonymous using NordVPN, which is a virtual private network. And NordVPN is one of the leading providers in the world which supports my channel here. I've used it for many years, and I have to say that it has saved me in the past when it's pointed out that a certain website is either insecure or perhaps even malicious. And as NordVPN supports my channel here, you'll get 4 months extra free using my link nordvpn.com/BBB, linked in the description below. And you'll have that peace of mind knowing you're that little bit more secure browsing the internet and downloading files. You can even check out Nord Protect, which is a new service, which is an all-in-one identity theft protection service. Check that out in the description below, and thank you to Nord for sponsoring this video. Now, the serious issue with this is that this guy ostensibly was about to drive away. Now, the big problem here is many of these situations, the driver wants to drive away because they don't have insurance, they don't have a license, they know that they're going to get caught. And, it's a very serious offense, driving with no insurance. It's, 6 to 8 penalty points. You can get your car seized and crushed and all sorts of stuff. If you've got no license, then you've automatically got no insurance. Well, even if you've got insurance, it'll be voided. The insurance won't pay out, except in one case that I've known where the insurer did choose to pay out, even though it was the spouse of the person driving and they weren't actually insured, but the company decided to pick up the bill anyway. But in many cases, they are simply not insured, and therefore they want to drive away. Now, you'll be staggered to learn that if you are hit by an uninsured driver, firstly, there is some recourse, but secondly, it is picked up by virtually every other law-abiding insurance payer. Now, the Motor Insurance Bureau, now this is just to make absolutely clear, this is not in any way, shape or form against the Motor Insurance Bureau. They are there for a very good cause. They assist drivers who are hit by someone who does not have insurance. And so there is a subsidy built into everyone else's insurance premiums, and this goes towards, it's almost entirely funding the Motor Insurance Bureau, which then pays out to people who are hit by an uninsured driver. They do great work in trying to reduce people driving without insurance and so on. And they assist people when they are hit by someone in this situation. Now, I've had a few clients in that situation as well. And in fact, if you are a third party and you are hit by somebody and you want to check if they have insurance, there is a provision on the Motor Insurance Bureau where you can click third party check, go through, then put in your details as to who you are and what the incident was and why you want to obtain information as to whether they have insurance. Also, if it's for yourself, you can do a personal check to ensure that your own personal vehicle has active insurance. And this is actually more common than you might think as a problem, because if the payment doesn't go through and you think it did and it just didn't for whatever reason, let's say the payment was bounced, then you might not have insurance. And it's a strict liability offense. You are driving without insurance. Doesn't matter whether you knew about it or not. That might serve as mitigation, but it's not a defense if you didn't have insurance. It is a strict liability offense. So you can use that website to check if you have active insurance, because you might have tried to get insurance but may have failed to do so. But what might absolutely stagger you is the provisions for international drivers driving in the UK on a non-GB license. For example, if you go through this process here, you can check if you are a visitor to Great Britain from any country. There's different provisions for the EU, Jersey and so on, but any other country, they can drive for 12 months from when they last entered Great Britain. So if they leave Great Britain and come back to Great Britain, they get another 12 months driving on an international driving license. So obviously the standards can vary from country to country, and there are certain countries that we trust a little bit more than others. For example, if we go back to this, if you're a visitor to Great Britain and you are from the EU, for example, then you can drive any type of vehicle listed on a full and valid driving license from the EU. To be valid, you need proof of insurance and so on and so forth. But again, if we go back to any other country, they can drive for 12 months from when they last entered the UK. If they are resident in the UK, which is, I think, 185 days in the UK, even if they are driving a full lorry, a minibus, or a bus, then from any other country, again, they can drive for 12 months after becoming resident in Great Britain, as long as the license remains valid. After the 12 months, they cannot exchange it for a Great Britain license, and they'll have to stop driving on the foreign license, and they'll have to apply for a provisional license, then pass the theory test and the practical driving test. But that means they can be from anywhere in the world, and they can come and be resident here, and they can drive for 12 months. And bearing in mind, the standards can be very different. And of course, all of this must feed back into the statistics in the UK as well. But also, if you're involved in a collision that was not your fault, your insurance premium might still be affected, even though you might be stationary. And it might affect your vehicle and every other vehicle that you own, and sometimes the other vehicles in your household, because insurance providers often ask you about the insurance claims within your household, not just your personal vehicle. So as I said, utterly infuriating as it appears when someone has crashed into someone, and then as it appears that they want to drive away after the event, as in this video here. So absolutely terrible for people in that position, and they've had to go through court to fight their case, even if it's as simple as someone pulling out on them and crashing into the side of their car. But speaking of things that are morally questionable and logically questionable for that matter, you may have heard that regulators have approved clinical trials for children as young as 10 to experiment as to the effectiveness of puberty blockers, even though they are currently banned. The current ban on puberty blockers has been made indefinite on experts' advice. Existing emergency measures banning the sale and supply of these drugs and hormones will be made indefinite following the official advice from medical experts, and that was just in December last year. This followed a targeted consultation and advice on patient safety from the CAS review. The CAS review found that there was insufficient or inconsistent evidence as to the effect of puberty suppression on the psychological, physiological, and psychosocial well-being, cognitive development, cardiometabolic risk, and fertility of children from receiving these drugs. NHS England then announced that children with gender dysphoria would no longer receive these blockers as routine practice, and they've been confined to research settings. However, this Pathways trial is a clinical study that's been approved to recruit around 226 young children as young as 10 or 11 years old to see what the effects of these things are. Rupert Lowe MP has put pen to paper and says, "I've just invited all MPs to sign this letter urgently, calling on the Secretary of State for Health to immediately halt a new trial administering dangerous puberty-blocking drugs to young children. We cannot allow experimental drugs to be given to confused young boys and girls. We cannot allow twisted ideologies to harm children. This trial must be shut down immediately. If you agree, please ask your MP to sign, and we'll put as much pressure on in Parliament as possible. Leave children alone," he says. So if you want your MP to sign this letter, then you can send a copy of this to them politely and ask them to sign it. The letter says as follows: "Dear Secretary of State, we're writing to you with profound concern and frankly disgust regarding the decision to authorise a new clinical trial administering puberty-blocking drugs to children as young as 11. I think it's actually as young as 10. This is a deeply unethical experiment, one which must be immediately halted. We cannot further expose children to such harmful medical interventions. This trial is not safe, and it is certainly not ethically defensible. No child is born in the wrong body. To suggest otherwise in any way is a wildly irreversible abuse of power and authority. Normalizing this attitude at all is immoral and dangerous. It places vulnerable children into an experiment with drugs known to affect physical and mental health. No amount of procedural safeguards can disguise the reality that young boys and girls are being put in harm's way to satisfy political pressure. Administering experimental drugs to children for such vile reasons is repugnant. We cannot and must not repeat the catastrophic failures of the Tavistock era, and we cannot allow twisted ideological pressure to override our duty to protect children. We urge you to intervene immediately, halt this trial, and initiate a full review of how such outrageous decision was reached. Leave children alone." And just as a couple of side stories here, since we don't trust children as young as 10 to make decisions about themselves in many situations. One such story, a child wrote a very heartfelt letter to the court, the family court, so it's all private, obviously, detailing a lot of things that had happened to her, which were quite awful. But the court essentially disregarded what she had to say because the court felt that one parent was leaning on the child as to what that child put in the letter. Thus, the court didn't regard that letter as truthful. The court felt that it was just what that parent wanted the child to say. So in that situation, I would suggest that if the courts are not trusting children at around about that age to report on what's happening at home with one parent or the other, then I would also then suggest that we cannot trust those children to accurately and reliably make an informed choice that they are born into the wrong body and thus would consent to these life-altering drugs. Now, I am no expert on the long-term effects of these things, but they were deemed to be unsafe and therefore they were banned. Given the fact that the Cass review found that there was insufficient evidence to show that these drugs were safe. West Streeting at the time said that children's healthcare must always be evidence-led. Now, just to put this clearly and spell this out, they are currently seemingly suggesting that because there is insufficient evidence to show that they are safe to use, they want a clinical trial to gather evidence to show whether or not they are safe. They are literally, in my view, experimenting on children to see what the effects are, to gather the evidence to make an informed decision. That is not really the way of doing it, in my personal view. West Streeting at the time said the Independent Expert Commission on Human Medicines found that the current prescribing and care pathway for gender dysphoria and incongruence presents an unacceptable safety risk for children and young people. Dr. Cass's review also raised safety concerns around the lack of evidence for these medical treatments. We need to act with caution and care when it comes to this vulnerable group of young people and follow the expert advice, which at the time was there's no evidence that they are safe. He said, at the time, we are working with NHS England to open new gender identity services so people can access holistic health and wellbeing support they need. In other words, they can access support that they need, but without the drugs that they have insufficient evidence about. He did then say that they are setting up a clinical trial into the use of puberty blockers next year to establish a clear evidence base for the use of the medicine. In my personal view, this is not only logically flawed, but it is morally reprehensible. And to say that it's caused outrage online and across the country would be an understatement. I do not believe that children of this age can consent to drugs, particularly when there is no evidence as to what their real effects are. And what I can say with some degree of certainty is that in a few years' time, there will be, I think it's a case of when, not if, I think there will be cases brought against the people that bring about this trial and against those who administer it, against the government in general, against the NHS in general. And I do think we'll be looking at a wave of claims by people who've had their lives turned upside down, and they will claim, rightly so, that they could not possibly have consented to these treatments. So let me know what you think about that in the comments below. Respectfully, as always, please. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.